All right. So we're up to page 71, Psychotic Disorders. Introduction with Dr. William Pettit, Jr., MD. And he's a retired psychiatrist, board certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, in adult psychiatry, geriatric psychiatry,
I know
adolescent psychiatry, psychosomatic medicine, and addiction medicine. Woo. Lots of certifications there. He's also an adjunct professor at Creighton University, near where he and his wife live now in Arizona. So this is a conversation between the author, Hannah Studley, and Dr. Bill Pettit. Hannah says, Dr. Pettit, you have decades of experience as a psychiatrist in hospital clinics and private practice. What would you like to share with us about understanding mental health? And Dr. Pettit answers, well, it's funny, but in all my years of medical training, they taught us a lot about mental illness. But there was not one lecture on mental health. And it's innocent. As we read this, I want to remind everybody that people can only see what they see. And so the species, humanity, is evolving. So what I know, this is back to Bill's answer, what I know about mental health came later, after I met Sydney Banks in 1982. I had received an invitation from Dr. George Pransky to join him at one of Sid's talks in San Francisco, quite unaware that it was going to change my life. Sid sat quietly. His voice was clear and strong, but he made it clear that he had no need or interest in us believing what he said or in him convincing us of anything. He merely asked that we listen with a mind open to hearing something new. Even so, there was a feeling of undeniable certainty when he spoke. Tony Robbins, he was not. This was no salesman or charismatic performer, but an ordinary man who was attempting to share the profound insights he had come to see following an extraordinary experience. Within 30 minutes, I sensed that this man, with a limited formal education, knew much more about mental health and mental well-being than I did. Boy, that's quite a statement. George then arranged a meeting with Sid, and I soon realized that I was the first psychiatrist to be genuinely interested in learning from Sid. For the next 26 years, Sid did his best to facilitate my journey of understanding mental health by understanding the three principles. Hannah says, how did your colleagues react to this change in how you saw mental illness? Oh, what a great question, huh? Dr. Pettit, I was the consulting psychiatrist at Illinois State Mental Hospital, where there was a psychologist who expressed rather strong skepticism of my contention that everyone had mental well-being within them that could not be lost, damaged, or even scratched. Following a number of discussions between us, his level of generalized anxiety and proneness to panic attacks nearly disappeared completely. He failed to acknowledge any causal relation between this and our conversations. But he asked me to co-lead a weekly group session on a ward consisting only of patients diagnosed with chronic schizophrenia. There were 20 patients in the group, and in the third week, Herb, one of the patients, had a transformational experience. He was 67 years old and had spent nearly 47 years of his life in this hospital. 47 years of his life in this hospital. I'm repeating it. He was taking daily a number of psychotropic medications prescribed at substantial doses in the hope of dampening the painful experiences produced by his disease. Disease in quotes. He had spent the first 2.5 of the weekly sessions sitting with his chair somewhat askew from the others, quietly conversing with apparent auditory hallucinations. In parentheses, thoughts with special effects. Isn't that a great way to view auditory hallucinations, as thoughts with special effects? Halfway through the 60-minute group, Herb abruptly broke into laughter. And I've heard Dr. Pettit share this story in different YouTube videos. It's so sweet. It was not a giggle, but a total body convulsion of laughter. He was bent over, holding his stomach. Very soon, the other 19 patients, my psychologist colleague and I, were mirroring Herb's behavior, not having a clue as to why he or we were all laughing. I tried to ask him what was so funny, but he couldn't stop laughing. Finally, Herb started to slow down, and I waited for his breathing to normalize. As I waited for us all to come back to what was now a new level of presence in the room, I noticed he was uncommonly serene. I asked him if he would be willing to tell us what had been so funny. Herb gently picked up his chair, placed it completely within the circle, looked across the group into my eyes, and in a soft, clear voice declared the following. Doctor, while you were talking, I suddenly realized that I have been making myself crazy for 47 years. And I see that I don't have to do that anymore. Whew! The hairs of my arms stood at attention. I sat motionless. I thought, did Herb really just say what I thought he said? I didn't sign up for this. I do want to help people, but this seems a bit over the top. Is what Sid saw really true? So Dr. Pettit is at this point of questioning, like, what the heck was that?
Yeah.
Herb then quietly took us on a journey into the challenges he had faced as a 20-year-old. He'd gotten caught in a cycle of troublesome thinking and increasing psychiatric symptoms that had progressed and continued until this incredible insight. He left the state hospital after about 6 weeks. My God, I just have to read that again. He left the state hospital after 6 weeks. He had been there for 47 years. I, along with many other mental health staff, observed that he no longer needed to be there. Before leaving, he was able for the first time to engage in learning and successfully mastering skills he would need to live independently. I had been able to taper him safely off all his medications and convince the medical director that the unthinkable had indeed occurred. You know, I've heard this several times, but reading it just is really, oh, anybody want to take over while I blow my nose? I can keep going. Oh, thanks, Elaine.
You're welcome. I had a 3-year follow-up conversation with my psychologist colleague who had witnessed this remarkable transformation. He had spoken to the social worker who periodically checked on how Herb was doing. Herb was now 70 years of age and had continued to thrive and enjoyed living in his own apartment. He went to the nearby senior center on a regular basis and enjoyed playing cards, dancing, and going to movies with his friends. He had not needed to restart any psychotropic medications, nor had he required psychiatric care. Hannah, what do you think he heard in the group that day that would have produced such a transformation? I don't know the exact answer, but something from the depths of his own consciousness profoundly reawakened his innate mental well-being. I observed many similar miracles throughout the next 40-something years. During my year at Illinois State Hospital, Herb's story was one of many remarkable instances I witnessed, where alleged, seriously mentally ill people reclaimed their mental well-being. I never questioned the presence of innate mental well-being within anyone ever again. Hannah, wow, that's an amazing, inspiring story, Sid Banks said. There is one generic mental illness and an inability to see the role of thought. Can you share with us how you see that as a psychiatrist? Dr. Pettit, sure. In the late 1980s, they did what they call activation studies. They've done hundreds of them now with many variations. The first one was just with 6 people. They hooked them up to a PET scanner. Later, they hooked them up to MRIs. What those instruments do is they show part of the physiology of the brain metabolism. They don't read people's minds or anything like that, but they show whether there's an imbalance with what's happening in the metabolism. They got a baseline of all 6 of these people. They had not been sexually abused or injured in combat or anything like that. They were average human beings who had experienced some things in their life. When asked to think upsetting thoughts for 3 minutes, they thought about when their grandmother died or when their dog died. They thought about this in a way that they got into the past memory. And in 3 minutes of upsetting thinking, every one of those 6 people created a clearly measurable biochemical imbalance in their brain in just 3 minutes. Wow. Now we all have thought habits. Some thoughts just kind of go in one side of our mind and out the other. We can also get a little tangled up in that kind of thinking. And we could call this worry. Then comes guilt and beating ourselves up for past mistakes. Then regrets and overanalyzing, where you keep saying, I gotta figure this out. I got to figure this out. It spirals down, going further and further into confusion and mood change. We are now into overanalysis, unresolved grief, and not coming to peace with past losses. Wow. So, Hannah, you are describing a progression downwards. Dr. Pettit, yes, I'm not judging anyone. It's just what happens when we don't understand. Sometimes I see people who have terrible panic attacks, even dissociative episodes, and they're having all these kinds of physical symptoms. And I say, how many hours do you, turning the page, spend in stressful thinking in a day? They say, oh, maybe an hour? And I know that's not true, but I also know they're not lying to me. They're so used to doing it that they're only counting when it gets really, really, really bad. So I turn the question around. I say, let me ask it another way. Of the 18 hours that you're awake, how many of those hours are you quiet and at peace? They all reply, well, not very many. What do you mean, I say? A quiet place where you're just in the present moment. A nice feeling? Maybe 3 hours out of 18? So that leaves at least 15 hours for stressful thinking? Because we're always either in one or the other? Hannah, yes, most of us aren't aware of how long it's been going on. People can get so used to being down, they don't notice it anymore. Like the wallpaper. So many people feel lost like that. Dr. Pettit, I think if you get lost in the woods, it's okay, but you want to realize that you're lost. That's very different from saying, oh, I'm lost in the woods. I'll just keep going and stay lost. That's how bad things happen. But if we're in tune to when we're lost, and that when we're lost, it's a very simple thing to do to find our way home. Hannah, so you were saying that getting caught up in our thinking isn't a problem if we know how it works and how to come back home. Dr. Pettit. I'm not asking you to believe what I say, but I have seen it clinically with literally thousands of patients. After I met Sydney Banks, I started to see that they were using the gift of thought in about 6 or 7 ways that seemed to cause problems. Worry is one of the most destructive habits to human beings, to our physical, emotional, spiritual, and psychological well-being. For the sake of this example, I'm going to suggest that I worry 6 hours a day, and let's just see what happens in 3 or 4 minutes, if you still think this is a good idea. So, if I worry 6 hours a day, what's going to happen to my mood? Am I going to become more lighthearted and joyful? No, my mood is going to go down, and I will progressively feel depressed. Have you ever noticed if you stay depressed for very long, it starts to be harder and harder to be nice to people? So then you start getting irritable. And then eventually, if you keep going long enough, you start feeling disconnected. And when you feel disconnected from yourself, from people that you love, from even whatever you call God, you feel totally alone. Sadly, this is how a person can walk into a movie theater with an AK-47 and kill indiscriminately because they are in unbearable pain. So I'm down, depressed, irritable, and disconnected, and there's tension in the body. What's going to happen to my level of tension? It's going to go up, isn't it? If you're falling asleep while driving on the highway, you will hit the rumble strips and it wakes you up, right? I'm going to suggest that all these diagnoses, the internalizing diagnoses, and the different forms of externalizing diagnoses, like addictions and violence, they're all divine mind's way of trying to wake up to the fact that we're using these 3 beautiful gifts of mind, thought, and consciousness, not in the way they were meant to be used. Wow. Hannah, you used the phrase divine mind. As a doctor, a man of science, I'm guessing you are referring to what anyone understands as the wisdom that is running the universe. Dr. Pettit, yes, I don't care if you call it Bob or God or Buddha, but let me say that again. Divine mind to me is always trying to wake us up. After 3 minutes of upsetting thoughts, there starts to be a biochemical imbalance in our brain. After 30 minutes, we start turning off our healthy genes and activating emergency genes, which eventually go to the unhealthy genes. After 30 minutes, we have 25,000 unhealthy activated genes. Wow, that is a chemical imbalance, not the imbalance we usually hear about. Wow. Dr. Pettit, did you know that we have 25,000 genes, but a tomato has 34,500, which I think is kind of humbling. There's a little worm that has 23,600, and we have 25,000. But here's what's amazing. There are only 5,000 of the genes that are on and 20,000 that are off. Think of a huge ball or hall with 25,000 light bulbs, and only 1 in 5 is on. If we activate the stress system for more than 30 minutes, we start turning off the healthy genes and the healthy physiology and turn on the illness genes. Please don't hear blame when I say this, but I am surprised when I see someone who comes in, say, a 45 or 50-year-old who has been spending 15 hours a day in stressful thinking. And then they have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, osteoarthritis, migraine headaches, fibromyalgia. One time I listed 11 things and this person turned white and said, I have all 11 of those. My heart went out to her. If I create enough biochemical imbalance that is endangering me, I just might set off a message in a place in the brain called the locus coeruleus, which literally injects noradrenaline into my body. If we had a nurse here and she injected the right amount of noradrenaline into me right now, I would suddenly have a little trouble catching my breath. I would feel my heart beating out of my chest. I would feel a little nauseated, a little shaky, and some perspiration. I would feel some hot flashes and some cold flashes. I'd be having a panic attack. Hannah, that describes a lot of people a lot of the time. Dr. Pettit, yes, but if we understand that we just got a little caught up in our thinking, hang on, pages are sticking, then it's only going to last for a few minutes. And we say, thank God, I got it. I'm going to leave my thinking alone now until I feel better in a few minutes. But then they get frightened because no one's told them how it works. And they go on, innocently making it worse. Oh my God, am I having a heart attack? Oh my God, I'm having a stroke. And now the brain keeps going, more noradrenaline, more cortisol, so that is how it lasts for hours, what it's meant to last for just 4 minutes, because the half-life of norepinephrine and noradrenaline is 1 minute. So in 1 minute, there's half left. 2 minutes, 25% left. 3 minutes, 12% left. 4 minutes, 6% left. 5 minutes, 3% left. Does that make sense? But nobody tells you that, and they just give you Klonopin and Xanax. Wow. Wow. Hannah, and people can be on these meds for decades. Yes, Dr. Pettit, and as this continues, they are then going to start having pain somewhere in the body, headaches, stomach pain, bowel issues. Hannah, so many people I talk to have all these problems, especially gut problems. Dr. Pettit, did you know that there are 3 or 5 more times more neural receptors in the bowel that there are in the brain and the central nervous system? Yes. So then they are going to start having sleep problems. Initially, we're going to have irregular sleep. We're going to have trouble getting to sleep and then trouble staying asleep. Then we're going to have trouble with our memory, misplacing things. Do you ever get so stressed that you can't remember stuff? Anna, yes. So now we're down there in the basement and we're feeling like crap. Anna, so we did this to ourselves? Dr. Pettit, yes, but it was innocent. It was innocent. It was an innocent misunderstanding. We took this powerful gift of thought. This is a gift of thought, and we've used it against ourselves. This beautiful gift God gave me, or whoever's in charge in the universe, whatever you want to call them, has given us this beautiful gift to be able to go through life. And we've misused it and created a tremendous amount of this disease. People are shocked when I tell them that these kinds of symptoms are wisdom's way of trying to wake them up to what they're doing with this gift. When a person starts feeling this amount of disease, it starts feeling horrible. And after a while, it's unbearable. So people start doing something to try to relieve this disease. We call these symptoms depression, anxiety, and panic attacks, and psychosomatic. We call these internalizing disorders. They have lists and lists. But there is one mental illness. It's chronic mental illness. It's over 50 years of practice. I've never seen a human being with a diagnosis from the DSM, ICD-10, or what they call psychiatric illness that wasn't suffering from chronic mental illness. Hannah, and people go on. Wow. Mary, would you like to pick up?
Sure. So Hannah, and people go on. Dr. Pettit, people go to alcohol, they go to drugs, they go to food. One lady tried to help weighed 455 pounds. When I explained all this to her, she started sobbing uncontrollably. I gave her tissues and just sat with her as much as a human being can when somebody else is going through something We sat quietly, and finally she stopped after a number of minutes, wiped her eyes, and started breathing normally. I said, Nancy, would you feel comfortable telling me what you just experienced? She said, I had just had the most beautiful experience I've ever had in my entire life. I was surprised, so I asked her what it was. She said, when we talked about 12 to 14 hours a day of stressful thinking, that we're all psychologically innocent, that we're doing the best we can, but that we are doing this to ourselves, and how we then look to something to try to relieve it. I suddenly was overwhelmed with feelings of unconditional love and compassion for my alcoholic parents. I had been judgmental of them my entire life, and then I saw that we were just three beautiful human beings who innocently were creating incredible levels of disease through 12 to 14 hours of stressful thinking. They went to alcohol to try to relieve their pain. I went to food. Gambling, anger, outbursts, violent behavior, isolation, OCD, these are all ways to cope. Interestingly, enough OCD rituals, even the DSM-5 and the ICD-10 have moved it away from anxiety disorders, because it's not an anxiety disorder. It's an attempt to relieve the anxiety. I had a lady in one of the last days of my working in the clinic who used to have up to 8 to 10 hours a day where she had to do rituals. Over half of her waking hours were trying to relieve the anxiety that she was creating with her thinking and worry. I said, how did you discuss the rituals before? How did we not discuss the rituals before? And she said, because the rituals were not the problem. Do you see that? Hannah, yes, they were the solution. Dr. Pettit, the alcohol is not the problem. It causes problems, but it's not the problem. Nor are the drugs, nor the food, nor the gambling. It's not the problem. It's the solution a person has come up with to try to relieve some of the internal disease. I'm going to tell you that what we call mental illnesses are actually divine mind's attempt to keep the person alive. Chronic mental stress is the one mental illness, as Sid said. There's a thing that we use in clinics now in the United States. It's called cross-cutting symptom profile or symptom inventory. There are 25 questions on it, and it covers 13 different areas. I recently had an insight about this. Those 13 things, they're not disparate. They're all connected. These are the things that are measured: depression, irritability, feeling isolated, disconnected. This sounds familiar? Tension, anxiety, flooding, panic attacks, phobias, OCD rituals, all of it to try to deal with the anxiety. And when that fails, disassociation. They get so anxious that they literally have an hour or two twice a day, or once a day, or 3 times a week, or twice a week, where they literally miss hours of time. Hannah, Anna O, for its first client, had what she called absences. This was disassociation. Dr. Pettit, yes, they'll say, my gosh, it's 3:30. Last thing I remember, it was 11 o'clock this morning. I don't know where I am. If you turn on too many electric appliances in your home, what happens? The circuit breaker turns everything off. And then the circuit breaker could talk to me at that moment. He'd say, Bill, until you learn how to use electricity with a little more common sense, you're not going to get any electricity. So better start learning. Divine mind, when it takes people into disassociation, is saying, if you're spending 95% of your time not conscious of what you're doing, hurting yourself and creating biochemical dysregulation, and even affecting epigenetics and your genes, the best I can do is turn you off for a couple of hours twice a day so you don't do as much damage. Hannah, so it's not illness or condition. It's actually wisdom helping us cope or escape from the pain of anxious thinking. Dr. Pettit, I've even had people that slept to escape. A female patient came to me and would sleep 20 hours a day. Do you see how divine mind is working? Because when she was awake, she spent 90% of the time in upsetting thinking. It was better for her to sleep 20 hours a day so she didn't do as much damage till she had an insight. So it gave her time to eat, get a shower, get cleaned up, say hello, and go back to sleep. So anxiety, OCD, disassociation, pain, sleep disturbance, and memory disturbance. These are some of the things measured on the cross-cutting survey. And what I saw was that these are all created by an incredible level of dis-ease. Now, what happens? People go to some form of substance misuse and all kinds of externalizing behavior. It could be gambling, it could be anger outbursts, it could be food, it could be misuse of sex. If that fails, people start having suicidal thoughts. I tell people, your suicidal thoughts are your friends. Hannah, can you explain that? Dr. Pettit. Well, it's a wake-up call to let you know that what you've been doing with this gift of thought, it is natural that when you get caught up and give attention to negative thinking, your mood goes down and your attention level goes up. Your brain is a computer and it's saying, Bill, have you noticed how bad you're feeling? Have you seen any sign at all that it's going to get better? No? Then your mind says, I've got a solution. I can get out of the game. You don't have to suffer like this anymore. You have tried so hard and it hasn't worked, has it? Suicidal thoughts are the mind's way of saying that what you've been doing with your thinking is really hurting you. It's an alarm. Hannah, like a smoke alarm. A smoke alarm is designed to get our attention to help us get to safety. Dr. Pettit. Yes, exactly. When I was a Navy flight surgeon, one of the things they did to us was they put us in a centrifuge. They spun us around with our heads covered, and then they decelerated it to half the speed. When you do that, it changes the blood flow to your brain to where all your thoughts, and we were now going in the opposite direction. They took the hoods off of us, and we had this incredible experience of our eyes telling you that you're going one way and your body telling you that you're going the other way. We had to choose one. I chose my eyes because I trusted them more than my body. Fast forward 18 months, I'm out on an aircraft carrier 100 miles off the coast of Charleston, North Carolina. A flight surgeon operational readiness is very important. They're preparing to go to the North Sea. They've had timed this because they knew a big storm was coming, and they knew in the North Sea that it would be a lot work. It would be a lot of storms. So this big storm was coming up, and they sent all the jets up. And by late afternoon, the waves were 25 to 35 feet high. Even these huge aircraft carriers were bobbing around like a cork. The moon goes, the stars go, and now these pilots have to land on this aircraft carrier with no visual reference. And many of them got vertigo, where they experienced that their plane was upside down. So what did they want to do if the plane is upside down? You want to turn it over, but they would have crashed and probably hit some of the planes that were parked and had massive explosions. Most of the experienced pilots get down. They had sent him off. They sent him off rather than crash the $1 million airplanes into the ocean. So they sent him off to Charleston to land on a nice lit flat airfield. So why do you say this? Because the older pilot understood how things worked. They were able to overcome the vertigo feeling of being upside down. They trusted the instruments. They looked at the instruments, and their instruments said that you are right side up. And even though their entire body told them that they were upside down, they believed their instruments, and they landed the plane. Hannah, what a brilliant analogy. It's a reliable system. You need to trust our minds will settle if we leave the thinking alone. Dr. Pettit, we have an infallible instrument system in our body. It's called our feeling level, and it will let you know when you have turned yourself upside down with your thinking. It's just an experience. We're all going to go through them. We want to help people recognize that feeling of going south before they crash. I think the deeper that you understand these principles and have insight into them, you get greater awareness and catch quicker when you're headed for trouble, and you are able to allow your mind to quiet. Hannah, can you explain how mania and psychosis come from? Dr. Pettit, mania and hypomania is where people have this incredible energy and go for days without sleep. They're sometimes psychotic, and they're doing all kinds of strange things. Mania is, again, it's an attempt to try to cope. I've been asking people in the last 2 years who had mania and hypomania episodes, what was the last thing you remember before you went into your mania or hypomania? And everyone said, and every one of them that could remember said, my depression had gotten so bad that I was truly considering suicide. One of them told me the last thing I remember was I was going to kill my wife, my 2 children, and then myself, because I failed them economically, and I was not going to have them suffer. Do you see what mania did for that man? It saved him and his family. It saved 4 people's lives. It also got the cavalry involved to help. If you're setting fires in the middle of the street, or you're running around with no clothes on, or you're handing out $100 bills on the corner, you get attention. Mania is an attempt by divine mind to keep a person alive. Well, that's Bill Pettit's version of this. Schizophrenia and psychosis are a world patients create in their heads. Life has become so painful that they have to go to another world. The world they created in their head by an innocent misunderstanding of thought is so painful that they have to go to another world. Hannah, can you give me an example of this? Dr. Pettit, sure. When I was a Navy medical resident, I had a lady who had 2 small children. This was 1976, 40 years ago. My husband was going out on an aircraft carrier, and her husband was going out on an aircraft carrier, and they would be gone for 12 months at a time. There wasn't all the internet we have now, so she would maybe get letters, a couple of phone calls in 12 months. So they decided that she probably shouldn't get pregnant, but their religion said you can't do anything to stop that from happening. And she got pregnant. 3 months into his 12-month deployment, she has a baby. She's overwhelmed. She starts to send 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day, stressing out, worrying about things. She has all the hormonal changes that occur with pregnancy and goes into postpartum depression. She starts having urges to take a butcher knife, and kill this little baby. All she would have had to do when started feeling overwhelmed was to call the wives clubs for her squadron. They would have one of the other ladies come for 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, and 2 hours in the evening. They would have taken turns sleeping over with her if she had needed that. They really know how to support each other. But she said to herself, I should be able to do this. My mother did it for 7 of us kids. My father was a truck driver. Sometimes he didn't come home for 2 weeks. Sometimes he came home over the weekend. I should be able to do this, even though her common sense and divine mind was saying, you're overwhelmed. You need some help right now. So what happened? Divine mind created a delusion. In a way of understanding, universal mind created a delusion to keep that baby alive. She started to believe that the baby was her baby brother who had died of pneumonia when she was 12 and he was 2. Now she cared for that baby brother for about 4 weeks. She had still spending 8 to 8 to 10 or 12 hours a day in chronic stress. She then started having breakthroughs again. She had breakthroughs, urges to take the butcher knife and stab the baby to death. To me, Divine Mind then had to use her Christian belief system. It formed the delusion that she was the Blessed Virgin Mary and the baby was the baby Jesus. Pretty unlikely, but the Virgin Mary is going to kill the baby Jesus. They found her naked, feces all over, urine all over, and singing religious songs to the baby Jesus. Now that sounds really crazy, doesn't it? But do you see the psychotic delusion to save the baby's life, probably the other 2 children's lives, and then she would probably have killed herself? We read this kind of things in the newspaper, in the papers all the time. I have no investment in whether anyone else believes this, but I now see all these symptoms are love letters. They are signals from whatever wisdom or loving intelligence is running the universe. I believe that understanding the 3 principles is a power facilitator of the evolution of consciousness. Hannah, thank you so much for sharing your insight. That was amazing. End of that chapter.
That was amazing, huh?
That was, what a chapter.
I'm curious what's going on with Patty. We've been reading 70 pages of this before this chapter, Patty. What are you hearing?
I'm hearing your sources. So I can pick out in the story the principles, the 3 principles, and how to apply them. So it's a very good book. I think I'll order it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing book. And there's a research study now going on with with many of the people in the book. It's just, the stories are incredible. You know, it gives so much hope for people going through hard times.
Well, you know, especially when you think all the people with psychiatric diagnosis don't have to live like that.
Right.
You just made a mistake in their thinking. Or Carrie, you know what I heard new today that I didn't hear before is that it starts off with a thought, and then you stay in that thought long enough, then the biochemicals take over. And if you live in the biochemicals, then that's what causes the changes that everybody terms as being psychiatric.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it all starts with thought. Gets the body all worked up.
It all starts with getting the body all worked up.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And you didn't know anything about this before you just by chance met Linda Quiring, the author of this book?
No, I didn't meet her, but I didn't meet her by chance. I actually looked for her. But I'll have to try to remember how I started the whole journey.
How long ago was that? It sounded like it was pretty recent when we first got on talking.
No, about 3 or 4 years ago.
3 or 4 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I actually went to Salt Spring Island and took in one of their seminar weekends.
At the school?
At the school, which
Wow,
yeah.
you must have been at the last one because they haven't done it for a few years. So you must have been at the last one.
I think they had a couple more after, and then it was shut down.
Yeah, people were getting too old, and Chip recently passed away. You may have heard.
Oh, did he? No, I haven't. No, I didn't hear that. I knew Marty. What was his last name?
Lipsky, Marty Lipsky.
That's right. He actually lives here in Richmond. So I've met with him a few times.
Oh,
And-
nice.
Yeah, there was a lady from White Rock. She was a florist in Salt Spring when Sid was doing his stuff.
Yeah.
my-
Quite a
this-
history.
Yeah.
What were you about to say, Patty?
Oh, I was
After you
just
said,
trying
"Oh my God."
I was just trying to remember her name. And she was the one who actually had his tapes. Had Sid Banks' tapes. Yeah, so I went to her place a few times and we listened to those tapes. And then there was a guy called Alan Flood. From wherever he actually
Alan
sent me-
Flood.
Yeah,
Alan comes on the program on Tuesdays. He comes on Tuesdays every so often. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, he sent me those tapes.
Yeah.
Huh.
Oh,
Yeah, and
nice.
then, so then, oh yeah, I got to know all about how all the little ins and outs because Linda knew Sid quite well.
Yes.
So it was very interesting talking to her and how everything happened, eh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and
The
then-
history is so interesting. It's 50 years of history. And Linda, as far as I know, was really Sid's first student.
yeah, she was, and she was, yeah. So she told me a lot about how different disagreements happened with the group and how his teaching had kind of changed when the psychologist came around. And being from the medical field, I could understand why it would happen that way. And I could also, being in medicine, I could understand why Sid had such a problem getting it across into the world. Because really, medicine is a closed system, so is religion, so is the education system. So good luck trying to introduce something new, especially like if you look at medicine. The guy who discovered the link of how germs travel, he knew that for 50 years. And for 50 years, nobody paid attention to him.
Mm.
Yeah, so it takes a long time for something new and radical to be accepted,
Mm.
especially especially I would think nowadays even more so when there's so much money involved in pharmacology and
Mm,
you know,
true.
yeah, just try and say, well, here's a thing that would dismantle a whole lot of mental illness. What are you going to do with the whole department?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, my goodness. It seems like it's a miracle
Mm.
that not only does this continue to spread, but do you have any idea how large it is now? I don't know if Linda Queering knows what has happened in the world. I just got back from Copenhagen in Sweden, Patty,
Yeah. Well, you know what?
because they've got big groups there. There's groups in, I think, every country. That I don't know if Marty Lipsky, I think he works in this group in Africa that
Mm-mm.
I can't think of his name now. Anyway, there's a group. You probably know Jim Beck. Do you know Jim Beck at
Jim
all?
and
'Cause
Patty. What was her name? Jim and it's been such a while that I've forgotten a lot of their names. Yeah, Jim was a lawyer there.
yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, the fact that not only is it still alive, this understanding, but the fact that it is now really worldwide, you know, it's one of those things you can't stop. Like, you know, when something shifts
Well,
so
I think
much.
it kind of evolved from when the way Sid was first talking, it evolved. But even the evolution, which is what I think everybody's practicing now, is actually very valuable. Because at
Oh,
first
yeah.
I don't think Sid realized he all that happened is that Sid would go into kind of a state or a trance, and he would start talking, and then people would get what they got from it. It wasn't until the psychologist joined everything that they kind of listened and then put it into a training. So they kind of organized.
Like concepts, yeah.
Well,
I-
yeah, they kind of, coming from their world, they kind
Yeah.
of go say, okay, taking what he said and put language to it that is now kind of help
Yeah.
sort his thoughts out about what was the experience and what were
Yeah.
the components of that experience.
Oh, yeah.
Up until then, Sid just talked about his experience and what he got.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Well,
was
you know, the beautiful thing, Patty, on Tuesdays, because now, and he's in Vancouver, and his name is Shane. Shane, who is the publisher who published Sid's books, he has curated the early recordings of Sid. So you can now hear recordings of Sid who will say things like Christ consciousness.
That's
Sid
right.
himself, my understanding, and I, you know, who knows, it's all hearsay.
Yeah.
But what I heard was that Sid asked for those to be taken off because people were misunderstanding the terminology Christ consciousness. They started thinking it was a religion. So, you know, wisdom played out, like wisdom came through Sid and said, well, the world's not quite ready to hear this. It's a little too spiritual. So he did, you know, see that it's the psychologists were going to bring this into the world in the best way that they could. And one of the psychologists is, it has researched there's a lot of peer-reviewed research now. And
Oh
we have
yeah.
another therapist and a nurse on with us. Mary's a nurse, Elaine's a therapist, I'm a therapist. You know, so thank heavens. Well, what do
Well,
you think? You
I
thank
think
wisdom, right?
well, I think a part of like with Linda, she was like, if you read Linda's book, she doesn't talk about those three principles, does she?
I don't know. I read it a long time ago when Jack Pransky edited it. Yeah, so I don't remember the particulars, but it's on my list to read. You know, it's a book we could read when we are finished with. There's so many books to read when we finish this one. We'll be
Yeah, I think
together
in
until
both of her
death do
books,
us part.
and her first book, The Island of Knowledge, I think it's called. Her first book was actually the when the okay, so Sid was talking for quite some time, and then somebody got the idea, hey, let's record these talks. And then when they recorded those talks, Linda and Sid they transcribed them, and that became the first book. And then she was
Yes, Mary's gotta go. You
okay.
gotta get back to work, Mary. Always great to see you. See you
Okay.
next Tuesday, if not before.
Okay, very good.
Yeah,
I'll pop
it's
in
just,
to see what's happening.
and we're gonna have to get going too. With
Yes.
the clients to take care of me and Elaine right now. But Patty, it's
Yes.
so great to have you. You know, invite Linda to come join us. We'd love to hear the stories from those early days and all celebrate that, you know, thank heavens it's still in the world and being shared and to the best of everybody's ability. You know, none of us.
Oh, I think it's very valuable. Actually, it made it very accessible to a lot of people. It's almost like
Yes,
it's good that the
yes.
evolution happened.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, exactly.
Yeah,
To make it as accessible to as many people as possible. That's the point.
yeah, exactly.
And so I'm so glad you found us. Yay,
Okay.
fun having you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay,
Bye.
take care. Hope to see you next Tuesday. Oh, you know what, Patty? Give me your email address. Can you put that in the chat? Do you know how to do that, Patty? Put your
Yeah.
email in
Yeah.
the chat. I'm going to stop the recording before I forget.